Welcome back to Park Ranger Files. Before we dive into tonight's collection of absolutely terrifying true stories from the Appalachian wilderness, I need you to do me a favor. Please hit that subscribe button right now. We're pushing hard to reach 1,000 subscribers before my birthday next month, and your support means everything. Drop a like on this video, and most importantly, leave a comment telling me which stories scared you the most. Story 1. My name is David Hernandez, and I work as a freelance photographer, specializing in nature and wildlife. Back in October of 2019, I was on assignment in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, trying to capture some fall foliage shots for a calendar company. I'd been camping solo for about 4 days, moving from spot to spot to get different perspectives of the autumn colors. On the fourth night, I set up camp near a place the locals called Spruce Hollow. It was this beautiful little valley, with a creek running through it, surrounded by these massive old-growth trees that were just perfect for what I needed. I got there around 3 in the afternoon, set up my tent, and spent the remaining daylight hours getting some amazing shots of the golden hour light filtering through the red and orange leaves. As darkness fell, I made myself some dinner on my camp stove. Nothing fancy, just some freeze-dried stuff and instant coffee. The temperature was dropping fast, which wasn't unusual for that time of year in those mountains. I'd say it was probably in the low 40s by the time I finished eating around 8 p.m. I decided to stay up for a while, editing some photos on my laptop and enjoying the sounds of the forest at night. That's when I first heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, creating that eerie whistling sound that happens sometimes in dense forest. But then I realized it wasn't wind at all. Someone was singing. The voice was female, high and clear, and she was singing what sounded like an old hymn or folk song. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was haunting and beautiful. My first thought was that there must be another camper nearby, maybe on the other side of the creek. I called out a friendly hello, but got no response. The singing just continued, never pausing, never wavering. I'll admit it creeped me out a little, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe whoever it was had headphones on and couldn't hear me. Maybe they were far enough away that my voice didn't carry. I went back to my laptop trying to ignore it, but the singing just kept going. Same melody, over and over, for what must have been an hour straight. Around 9:30, I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed in the direction the singing seemed to be coming from, which was downstream along the creek. The moon was nearly full that night, so even with the tree cover, I had decent visibility. I walked for maybe 10 minutes, following that voice, but it never seemed to get any closer. If anything, it sounded like it was moving away from me, always just out of reach. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I stood there in the dark, my flashlight beam cutting through the mist that was starting to rise from the creek, and I felt this overwhelming sense of being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this primal urge to run. Instead, I called out again, asking if anyone was there, if they needed help. Nothing. Just the sound of water moving over rocks and my own breathing. I turned around and headed back to camp, moving faster than I'd like to admit. When I got back to my tent, I checked my watch. It was 9:45. I climbed into my sleeping bag and tried to convince myself that I'd just heard another camper who'd gone to bed. No big deal. But then at exactly 10 p.m., the singing started again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. It sounded like it was coming from just beyond my tent, maybe 20 feet away. The same melody, the same female voice, but now I could make out some of the words. She was singing about going home, about crossing over water, about meeting loved ones on the other side. It was a death song. I'm not ashamed to say I was terrified. I grabbed my knife and sat up in my sleeping bag, staring at the thin nylon wall of my tent, half expecting to see a silhouette appear. The singing continued for another hour, circling my camp. Sometimes it would be to my left, then it would move to my right, then behind me. It was like whoever or whatever was out there was walking in circles around my tent. At 11 p.m., it stopped again. This time I heard footsteps. Not the cautious, careful footsteps of someone trying to sneak up on you. These were deliberate, heavy footsteps, like someone walking with purpose. They came right up to my tent and stopped. I could see the impression of someone standing there, the fabric of my tent pushed in slightly by their presence. Then a voice, the same voice that had been singing, spoke. "Why are you in my hollow?" I didn't know what to say. My mouth was dry, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I managed to stammer out something about being a photographer, just camping for the night, that I'd leave first thing in the morning. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, "People don't leave my hollow. They stay. They sing with me." That's when I made my decision. I wasn't waiting until morning. I grabbed my car keys, unzipped my tent, and ran. I didn't look back, didn't try to see who or what was standing there. I just ran through the woods in the moonlight, following the trail I'd come in on, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning from the cold air. When I got to my truck, I fumbled with the keys, dropped them twice before I got the door open. As I climbed in and started the engine, I looked back toward the trail. Standing at the edge of the clearing where I'd parked was a woman in a long white dress. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down past her waist, and even from that distance, I could see that her feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating. I put the truck in gear and got the hell out of there. Drove straight through to the nearest town, which was Elkins, about 40 minutes away. I checked into a motel and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went to the local library and started researching Spruce Hollow. Turns out, back in 1897, a young woman named Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore disappeared in that area. She'd been on her way to a singing school, a popular thing back then where traveling teachers would go from community to community teaching people how to sing hymns. She never made it. Search parties looked for weeks, but never found any trace of her. According to the old newspaper articles I found, she was known throughout the region for having the most beautiful singing voice anyone had ever heard. I never went back for my camping gear. I didn't go back for my tent, my sleeping bag, my camp stove, nothing. It's still out there as far as I know. And sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I can still hear that melody in my head. That same haunting tune over and over. I still do nature photography, but I don't camp solo anymore, and I sure as hell don't camp anywhere near Spruce Hollow. Story 2. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a high school chemistry teacher from Pittsburgh. In the summer of 2016, my husband Thomas and I decided to take a vacation hiking through parts of the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. We're both experienced hikers, been doing it for years, and we thought it would be a nice way to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. We'd planned a 5-day trip, nothing too ambitious, just following some of the marked trails and camping at designated sites along the way. Everything was going great until the 3rd day, when we decided to take a detour to check out an old fire lookout tower that was marked on our map. The tower was about 2 miles off the main trail, and according to the map, it had been decommissioned back in the 70s. We're both kind of history buffs, so we thought it would be cool to see it and maybe get some good photos from the top if it was still safe to climb. The hike to the tower was tougher than we expected. The trail was overgrown and barely visible in places, and we had to use our GPS to make sure we were still heading in the right direction. After about an hour of bushwhacking, we finally saw it rising above the trees. It was one of those old wooden towers, probably 60 or 70 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top where the fire watcher would have lived during fire season. The whole structure looked like it was about ready to fall over. The wood was gray and weathered, and there were gaps in the stairs where boards had rotted away completely. Thomas wanted to climb it anyway. He said if we were careful and tested each step before putting our full weight on it, we'd be fine. I was hesitant, but he can be pretty persuasive when he wants to be, and I'll admit I was curious to see the view from up there. We started climbing, moving slowly, testing each step. About halfway up, I noticed something that made me stop. There were scratches on the wooden railing, deep gouges that looked fresh. Not like animal scratches, these were straight lines, parallel to each other, like someone had dragged something sharp down the wood. I pointed them out to Thomas, and he said they were probably from bears. But I've seen bear claw marks before, and these weren't the same. These were too uniform, too deliberate. I told him I had a bad feeling and wanted to go back down, but he was already almost to the top, and he called down that the view was incredible. Against my better judgment, I kept climbing. When I got to the top, Thomas was right. The view was spectacular. You could see for miles in every direction, rolling mountains covered in dark green forests stretching to the horizon. The cabin at the top was small, maybe 8 by 8 feet, with windows on all 4 sides. The door was hanging open, creaking slightly in the breeze. Thomas went inside to look around, and I heard him say, "Whoa, You need to see this. I stepped through the doorway and immediately wished I hadn't. The walls were covered in writing. Not graffiti or random scribbles, but thousands of names written in what looked like different hands. Some were carved into the wood, some were written in what might have been charcoal or pencil, and some were written in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Thomas was taking pictures with his phone, saying it was probably some weird art project or something. But I was reading the names and I noticed something. Next to each name was a date, and the dates were all in the future. I saw Michael Patterson, October 14th, 2016. That was 5 months away at the time. Sarah Chen, January 3rd, 2017. David Rodriguez, March 22nd, 2018. On and on, hundreds of names, but all with dates that hadn't happened yet. Then I saw it, written in the corner in what was definitely dried blood. Jennifer Walsh, August 8th, 2016. That was 2 days away. Right below it, Thomas Walsh, August 8th, 2016. Same date. I grabbed Thomas and showed him. The color drained from his face. He tried to rationalize it, saying someone must have looked us up somehow. Found out we were coming here, but that didn't make any sense. We hadn't told anyone about this detour. It wasn't in our itinerary. Hell, we'd only decided to check out the tower a few hours earlier. Then we heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was climbing the tower. We could hear the old boards creaking under their weight, hear them getting closer and closer. Thomas and I looked at each other, and I could see the same terror in his eyes that I was feeling. And there was only one way down, and whoever was coming up was blocking it. We moved to the far side of the cabin, pressing ourselves against the wall next to the door, out of sight from the entrance. The footsteps kept coming steady and unhurried. When they reached the platform just outside the cabin, they stopped. We waited. Seconds felt like hours. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Thomas had his pocket knife out. Not that it would do much good, but it was better than nothing. Then a voice spoke. It was a man's voice, deep and raspy, like someone who'd smoked for years. "I know you're in there," he said. "I saw your names on the wall. 2 days from now, you won't need to hide anymore." Thomas, being braver than me, called out asking who he was and what he wanted. The man laughed, this awful wet sound that made my skin crawl. "I'm the one who writes the names," he said. "I've been writing them for 40 years and never been wrong yet. Everyone whose name goes on that wall dies on the date I write. And that's just how it works." I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at Thomas and whispered that we needed to rush him, push past him, and run down the stairs. It was risky, but staying up there seemed worse. Thomas nodded. On the count of 3, we charged out of the cabin, but there was no one there. The platform was empty. We looked over the railing down the stairs and saw a figure in dark clothing descending rapidly, already halfway down the tower. We didn't wait. We practically jumped down those stairs, not caring if they'd hold, just desperate to get away from that tower and whoever that man was. By the time we reached the ground, he was gone. We searched the area, but there was no sign of him. It was like he'd just vanished into the forest. We hiked back to the main trail as fast as we could, and then kept going until we reached the nearest ranger station. We told them everything about the tower, the names on the wall, the man who'd followed us up. They listened politely, but I could tell they thought we were either crazy or making it up. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I don't know if they ever did. Thomas and I canceled the rest of our trip and drove home that same day. We spent the next 2 days barely sleeping, jumping at every sound, convinced that somehow what that man said would come true. August 8th came and went. Nothing happened. We didn't die. We're both still here, still alive. But here's the thing that still terrifies me. About 6 months after our trip, I was reading the news online and came across an obituary. Michael Patterson, the first name I'd seen on that wall, had died on October 14th, 2016, the exact date that was written next to his name. He'd been hiking alone in the George Washington National Forest and apparently fell from a cliff. I started looking up other names, other dates. I found 12 of them. 12 people who died on the exact dates that were written on that tower wall. Different causes, different circumstances, but always on the right date. I still don't understand how or why Thomas and I escaped. Maybe it was because we ran when we did, and maybe it was because we told people about it. I don't know. What I do know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again, and I have nightmares about that tower at least once a week. In my dreams, I'm back in that cabin, and I'm writing my own name on the wall. And the date next to it is always tomorrow. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying these stories so far. If you are, do me a huge favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know which story has been the scariest for you so far. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers before my birthday next month, and I really need your help to get there. Your support means everything to this channel. Now let's get back to the terror with our next story. Story 3. My name is Robert Chang, and I'm a software engineer from Raleigh, North Carolina. In the fall of 2018, my younger brother Kevin and I decided to do some backpacking in the Nantahala National Forest as a way to decompress from our high-stress jobs. Kevin works in emergency medicine, and our schedules rarely align. So when we both got the same week off, we jumped at the chance to spend some quality time together. We planned a relatively easy 3-day loop trail that would take us through some beautiful sections of the forest without being too challenging. We're both in decent shape, but neither of us are hardcore backpackers, so we wanted something manageable. The first day and a half went perfectly. Great weather, beautiful scenery, no problems at all. We camped the first night at a designated campsite near a small stream, had a good dinner, swapped stories, and slept well. The second day, we hiked about 8 miles to our next campsite, which was supposed to be near an old abandoned homestead from the early 1900s. We got there around 4 in the afternoon, which gave us plenty of time to set up camp before dark. The homestead was pretty much just a collapsed foundation and a few scattered bricks, but you could see where the house had been, and there was an old well that had been capped with concrete, presumably for safety. Kevin thought it was cool from a historical perspective, and we spent maybe half an hour walking around, imagining what life must have been like for the family who'd lived there. According to a trail marker, the place had been abandoned in 1923 after the entire family died in a typhoid outbreak. Pretty grim, but not uncommon for that era. We set up our tents about 50 yards from the old homestead in a nice flat area with good drainage. As the sun started to set, we made dinner and sat around our little campfire, enjoying the peace and quiet of the forest. That's when we heard the children laughing. It was faint at first, distant, and we both assumed there must be other campers nearby. Maybe a family with kids. The laughter continued for a few minutes, then stopped. We thought nothing of it and went back to our conversation. About an hour later, as it was getting dark, we heard it again. This time it was closer, and it sounded like multiple children, maybe 3 or 4 of them, playing and giggling. Kevin called out a friendly hello, thinking maybe the family would come over and introduce themselves, but no one responded. The laughter just continued, moving around us in the darkness beyond our firelight. We started to feel uneasy. It was weird that if there was a family camping nearby, they'd let their kids run around in the dark like that. And it was weird that they wouldn't respond when we called out. Kevin suggested we take a walk with our flashlights to see if we could find their campsite, make sure everything was okay. We walked for about 15 minutes in the direction the laughter seemed to be coming from, calling out, asking if anyone needed help. We didn't find any other campsites. No tents, no fire, nothing. And as soon as we'd walked far enough from our own camp, the laughter stopped completely. We headed back, both of us pretty creeped out at this point. When we got to our camp, the fire had gone out completely, even though we'd left it burning. Not died down, but out, like someone had doused it with water. The logs were soaked. Kevin checked our water bottles. They were all still full and sealed. Neither of us had poured water on the fire, and it hadn't rained. We relit the fire, both of us trying to come up with logical explanations. Maybe there was a natural spring nearby that we hadn't noticed, and water had seeped into our fire pit. Maybe we'd accidentally camped in a low spot where dew collected. We knew we were reaching, but admitting that something genuinely strange was happening was too unsettling. Around 10 p.m., we both decided to turn in. Kevin took one tent, I took the other, and we agreed to keep our flashlights handy just in case. I was exhausted from the day's hike, and despite the weird occurrences, I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up to the sound of Kevin yelling my name. I scrambled out of my tent to find him standing outside his, pale as a ghost, shaking. He pointed to the old homestead foundation, about 50 yards away. In the moonlight, I could see 4 small figures standing around the old well. They were children, or at least they looked like children, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. We stood there frozen watching them. They seemed to be playing some kind of game, holding hands and circling the well, singing a song I didn't recognize. Their voices were clear and bright, cutting through the night air. Then one of them stopped and looked directly at us. I can't describe how wrong that felt. Even from that distance, I could feel the weight of that gaze. The child raised its hand and pointed at us, and the singing stopped. The other 3 children turned to look at us as well. Then they started walking toward us. Not running, not rushing, just walking with slow, deliberate steps. Kevin grabbed my arm and said we needed to leave. Now, I agreed. We didn't bother packing up our tents or gear. We grabbed our packs with our valuables, turned on our headlamps, and started hiking back down the trail in the dark. Behind us, we could hear the children singing again, but now the song sounded different. The words were clearer, and they were singing about the well, about how they'd fallen in, about how they were cold and wanted someone to play with them. We hiked through the night, not stopping, barely speaking to each other except to make sure we were both okay. Every time we'd stop to catch our breath, we'd hear the singing behind us, always at the same distance, never getting closer, but never fading away either. At dawn, we reached a paved forest road and flagged down a ranger truck. The ranger could tell something was wrong and offered to drive us back to the trailhead where we'd parked. We told him we'd had a scary encounter with some people at the campsite and decided to abandon our gear and hike out. We didn't mention the children. Who would believe us? The ranger was understanding and drove us back. As we were driving past the turnoff for the trail to that homestead, I looked down the path and saw someone standing there. It was a small figure in old-fashioned clothes, watching our vehicle pass. I didn't say anything to Kevin or the ranger. I just looked straight ahead and tried not to think about it. We never went back for our gear. We filed a report about abandoning it, paid the fine, and that was that. Kevin and I have gone hiking together since then, but never in the Nantahala. We don't talk about what happened that night, but I know he thinks about it as much as I do. I did some research later and found historical records of the homestead. The typhoid outbreak in 1923 killed the parents and all 4 of their children. The children ranged in age from 4 to 10. According to one account I found in a local historical society's archives, 3 of the children died in the house, but one of them, the youngest, fell into the well while sick and drowned before anyone could get to her. That was the well we camped next to, the well those children were circling when we saw them. Sometimes late at night, when my apartment is quiet, I swear I can hear that singing. That same melody, those same words, about being cold and wanting someone to play with them. I tell myself, it's just my imagination, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I don't really believe that. Story 4, my name is Lisa Morrison, and I'm a veterinary assistant from Asheville, North Carolina. What happened to me in the mountains back in 2017 is something I've only told a handful of people. And most of them thought I was either lying or having some kind of mental health crisis. But it was real as anything I've ever experienced. And I still have the scars to prove it. It was late September, and I'd taken a weekend to myself to go solo camping in the Pisgah National Forest. I'd been going through a rough divorce, and I just needed some time away from everything and everyone to clear my head. I'm an experienced camper and hiker. Grew up in these mountains, so I wasn't worried about going alone. I found a nice spot off trail near a small creek and set up my tent on the second day of my trip. The plan was to stay there for 2 nights, then hike back out. The first night was uneventful, peaceful even. I sat by my fire, read a book, and went to bed early. The second night started out the same. I made dinner, sat by the fire, watched the stars come out. Around 9 p.m., I heard something moving in the woods nearby. Not particularly close, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, but definitely something large. My first thought was bear, so I secured my food in the bear bag I'd hung earlier and made sure my bear spray was handy. The movement stopped, and I didn't think much more of it. I was getting ready to turn in when I heard a voice call out from the darkness. "Hello, the camp," the voice said. It was a man's voice, older with a thick Appalachian accent. I responded cautiously, asking who was there. A man stepped into the edge of my firelight, and I got my first look at him. He was elderly, probably in his 70s or 80s, with a long white beard and wearing clothes that looked like they were from another era. Heavy wool pants, a faded flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat. He carried a walking stick and had what looked like an old leather pack slung over his shoulder. He apologized for startling me and asked if he could sit by my fire for a spell. He said he'd been walking for a long time and could use a rest. Something about him made me uneasy, but he was an old man, and I was brought up to be hospitable. I told him he was welcome to sit, but I kept my bear spray close. He sat down across the fire from me and thanked me kindly. We talked for a bit, small talk mostly. He asked where I was from, what I did for work, that sort of thing. I asked him the same questions, but his answers were vague. He said he lived in the mountains, had for his whole life, and that he walked these woods more than most folks walk their own property. After a while, the conversation took a strange turn. He started talking about trades, about how everything in life is a trade of one thing for another. Time for money, effort for reward, that kind of thing. I nodded along, not really sure where he was going with this. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "What would you trade to make your troubles disappear?" I laughed it off, said I wished it was that simple. But he didn't laugh. He just kept staring at me with these intense, pale blue eyes. "I can make you a trade," he said. "Your troubles for something you won't miss." I asked what he meant, and he explained that he could take away my pain, my divorce, my financial stress, all of it. In exchange, all he needed was a small piece of me. A memory I wouldn't miss, he said. Something from my childhood that didn't matter anymore. I told him that was crazy, that he couldn't just take away someone's problems like that. He smiled and said he'd been doing it for longer than I'd been alive. All I had to do was agree to the trade, and when I woke up in the morning, everything would be different. I should have told him to leave. I should have kicked him out of my camp and not slept until he was gone. But I was tired, so tired of fighting my ex-husband in court, of struggling to pay bills, of crying myself to sleep every night. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe there was some magical solution to all my problems. So I said yes. He reached into his pack and pulled out what looked like an old glass jar. He told me to think of a memory I didn't need anymore, something from my childhood that I wouldn't miss. The first thing that came to mind was this time when I was 7 and fell off my bike and scraped my knee. Totally insignificant memory, right? I told him about it and he nodded. He held the jar out toward me and told me to speak the memory into it, to give it up willingly. I felt stupid, but I did it. I described the memory out loud, every detail I could remember. And as I spoke, I started to feel strange, dizzy. The firelight seemed to get brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again. When I finished, the old man sealed the jar and put it back in his pack. He stood up, thanked me for the trade, and walked off into the darkness. I tried to call after him, to ask him what was supposed to happen now, but he was gone. I went to bed confused and honestly thinking I'd just had a really weird conversation with a slightly senile old mountain man. But when I woke up the next morning, everything was different. My phone had signal, which was weird because I hadn't had any signal at that campsite the entire time I'd been there. I had 17 missed calls and a bunch of text messages, all from my ex-husband's lawyer, all saying that my ex had dropped the divorce proceedings, that he was giving me everything I'd asked for, no contest. I couldn't believe it. I called the lawyer back and she confirmed it. Something had happened with my ex, some kind of change of heart, apparently. He wanted to settle quickly and fairly. She said it was the strangest thing she'd ever seen in 30 years of practicing law. I should have been happy, relieved, but I felt wrong, like something was missing. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging sense that I'd lost something important. It wasn't until I got home and was going through old photo albums that I realized what it was. There was a picture of me as a 7-year-old with a bandage on my knee. I was smiling, holding a blue bicycle, but I had no memory of that moment. None at all. I couldn't remember learning to ride a bike. I couldn't remember falling off it. I asked my mom about it, and she told me I'd been so proud that day, that I'd practiced for weeks and finally got the hang of it. She said I'd been devastated when I fell and hurt myself because I thought it meant I'd never be able to ride without training wheels. But I proved myself wrong, got right back on the bike, and kept going. According to my mom, that was a formative moment for me, a time when I learned that falling down didn't mean failure. It taught me persistence, and now it was gone. Not just the memory, but whatever that memory had given me. In the weeks that followed, I started to notice other changes. Things that used to scare me didn't anymore, not in a good way, in a concerning way. I'd put my hand on a hot stove and not pull it back right away. I'd cross streets without looking. I started taking risks that I never would have taken before. It wasn't until I almost died in a car accident that I realized what I'd lost. That childhood memory of falling off my bike hadn't just been a memory. It had been where I learned to be cautious, to understand that actions have consequences, that pain is real and should be avoided. The old man hadn't taken a useless memory. He'd taken part of my survival instinct. I tried to find him, spent months hiking those woods looking for any sign of him. I asked locals if they knew about an old man who lived in the forest, made trades with people. A few of them got real quiet when I described him. One old woman at a diner told me to stop looking, that if I'd made a deal with him, the only way to undo it was to find someone else to make a deal in my place. I couldn't do that. I couldn't curse someone else the way I'd been cursed. So I've had to learn to live with it. I've had to consciously remind myself of danger, train myself to be cautious in ways that used to come naturally. I still have the scars from the car accident. My left arm was broken in 3 places and I had to get a metal rod put in. Every time I look at those scars, I think about that trade. About how what seemed like a blessing turned out to be a curse. If you're ever in those mountains and an old man offers you a trade, don't take it. No matter how good it sounds, no matter how desperate you are. Nothing is ever free, and sometimes the price is higher than you can imagine. Story 5. My name is Marcus Wilson, and I work as an insurance adjuster in Knoxville, Tennessee. I never believed in anything supernatural until what happened to me in the Cherokee National Forest in March of 2020. I'd gone on what was supposed to be a simple day hike, one I'd done a dozen times before on a trail called the Bald River Falls Trail. It's about 2 miles round trip, not challenging at all, and ends at a beautiful waterfall. I'd started the hike around noon on a weekday, so the trail was pretty empty. I passed maybe 3 or 4 other hikers on my way to the falls, exchanged the usual pleasantries, and that was it. I spent about 20 minutes at the waterfall, taking pictures and enjoying the view before starting the hike back. About halfway back to the trailhead, I started to get this weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I'd stop and look around, but there was never anyone there. I chalked it up to just being alone in the woods and kept going. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around expecting to see another hiker, but the trail behind me was empty. I stood there for a minute listening. Nothing. I started walking again, and immediately the footsteps started again, Same pace as me, same rhythm. Every time my foot hit the ground, I heard a corresponding footstep behind me. I stopped. The footsteps continued for 2 more steps, then stopped. I called out, asked if anyone was there. No response. I started jogging. The footsteps jogged. I ran. The footsteps ran. Always right behind me. Always the same distance away. Never getting closer, but never falling back either. I made it back to the parking lot in record time, my heart pounding, sweat pouring down my face even though it was a cool day. I got to my car, looked back at the trailhead, and saw nothing. No one coming out of the woods. No explanation for the footsteps I'd heard for over a mile. I sat in my car for probably 20 minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself it was just my imagination or maybe an echo or something. Finally, I started the car and headed home. But the footsteps didn't stop. I could hear them when I walked from my car to my apartment. I could hear them in my apartment, pacing back and forth when I stood still. I could hear them at work, following me down hallways. Always the same pattern, always matching my pace. I thought I was losing my mind. I went to a doctor thinking maybe I had some kind of auditory hallucination thing going on. They ran tests. Everything came back normal. I saw a therapist thinking maybe it was stress-related. She prescribed anxiety medication. It didn't help. The footsteps continued for 3 months. Every day, every night. I couldn't sleep because when I'd lie still, I'd hear them walking around my bed. I started sleeping with headphones in, playing white noise, but I swear I could still hear them underneath the static. Then one night in June, they stopped, just like that. I woke up and for the first time in months, there was silence. Real silence. I was so relieved I almost cried. But that relief didn't last long. The next morning, I was getting ready for work and noticed something on my bathroom mirror. Written in the fog from my shower were 2 words. My turn. I live alone. My doors were locked. No one had been in my apartment. I haven't heard the footsteps since that day, but I've started noticing other things. My things get moved around. I'll put my keys in one place and find them somewhere else. I'll set my coffee cup down and it'll be gone when I turn back around. Photos on my phone that I know I didn't take. Pictures of me sleeping, me sitting at my desk at work, me in my car. Whatever was following me, whatever made those footsteps, it's not following anymore. It's here. It's in my life, in my space, and I don't know how to make it leave. I've tried going back to that trail thinking maybe I could undo whatever I did by being there again, but every time I get close to the trailhead, my car won't start. Or I'll get a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread that makes me turn around. I don't know what I encountered in those woods. I don't know what attached itself to me. All I know is that it's still here, and I'm starting to think it always will be. We're halfway through these terrifying stories, and I want to take a moment to ask you something. If you're getting chills from these accounts, if you're checking over your shoulder right now, then please help me out. Subscribe to Park Ranger Files if you haven't already. We're pushing hard to hit 1,000 subscribers before my birthday, and we're so close. Every subscription, every like, every comment helps. Tell me in the comments, which story has freaked you out the most so far? Your engagement means everything. Okay, let's continue with more terrifying true stories from Appalachia. Story 6, The Woman in the Photograph. My name is Daniel Torres, and I'm a landscape photographer based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. In November of 2015, I was on a photography expedition in the Blue Ridge Mountains, specifically around the Linville Gorge area. I was working on a series about forgotten places, focusing on old, abandoned structures and remote locations. I'd been given a tip about an old church that had been abandoned sometime in the 1950s, supposedly still standing in a pretty isolated area off the main trails. I like a good hike, and the idea of photographing an old church and its natural decay was perfect for my series. So I set out early one morning to find it. The hike took about 3 hours, following some barely there trails and relying pretty heavily on my GPS. When I finally found the church, it was even better than I'd hoped. The building was still mostly intact, though the roof had partially collapsed, and vegetation was growing through the floorboards. The wooden pews were still there, rotting and covered in moss. And there was even an old piano against one wall, keys yellowed and several missing. I spent about 2 hours photographing every angle, every detail. The light coming through the holes in the roof was perfect, creating these dramatic rays that cut through the dusty air. I was in photographer heaven. As I was packing up my gear, I decided to take one last shot of the altar area. I set up my tripod, framed the shot, and was looking through my viewfinder when I saw something that made me freeze. There was a woman standing behind the altar. I hadn't seen her come in, hadn't heard anything. She was just there, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white dress. She was staring directly at my camera, not moving, not speaking. I stepped back from my camera and called out hello, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring. I asked if she was okay, if she needed help. Nothing. Then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wrong somehow, too wide, showing too many teeth. I grabbed my camera and started backing toward the door. She didn't move, didn't follow, and she just stood there with that horrible smile, watching me leave. I practically ran back to my car, hiking those 3 hours in half the time, adrenaline overriding my exhaustion. When I got home, I downloaded my photos, and that's when things got really weird. The last photo I'd taken, the one of the altar, showed the woman. But she wasn't behind the altar anymore. She was in the foreground, maybe 3 feet from where my camera had been, right where I'd been standing. Her face was clearer in the photo than it had been in person. Her skin was gray, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black. That smile was even worse in the photograph, stretching from ear to ear in a way that wasn't anatomically possible. I deleted the photo immediately. Then I emptied my trash. Then I ran a program to make sure it was completely gone from my hard drive. I know that sounds extreme, but looking at that image made me feel physically ill. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I was going through some older photos from a different shoot, and there she was, in the background of a photo I'd taken in the Smoky Mountains 3 months earlier. Just standing among the trees, barely visible, but definitely there. Same white dress, same impossible smile. I went through my entire catalog. Every photo I'd taken in the mountains over the past year. She was in 17 of them. always in the background, always watching, always with that smile. And the dates of the photos showed a pattern. She was getting closer to the camera in each one. The first photo was from almost a year before I'd seen her in the church. She was so far in the background, she was barely a white smudge. With each subsequent photo, she was closer. By the time I got to the church photo, she was right next to me. I haven't taken any photographs in the mountains since then. I haven't even gone hiking. I sold all my camera equipment and switched to doing studio work and urban photography. But sometimes when I'm developing photos from a client shoot, I'll see her, just for a second, in the corner of an image. A flash of white, a too wide smile. Then when I look again, she's gone. I don't know what she is or what she wants. I don't know if she's still following me or if those brief appearances are just my imagination. Trauma from that encounter in the church. What I do know is that I'll never go back to those mountains. And I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, wondering if the next photo I take will be the one where she's finally close enough to touch. Story 7. My name is Patricia Henderson, and I'm a real estate agent from Johnson City, Tennessee. My husband James and I rented a cabin in the North Carolina mountains for our 20th anniversary in October of 2021. We'd found it on one of those vacation rental websites, and it looked perfect. Secluded, beautiful views, hot tub, the whole 9 yards. We arrived on a Friday evening, and the cabin was even nicer than the photos had shown. Modern amenities, but with that rustic mountain charm. We unpacked, opened a bottle of wine, and settled in for what we thought would be a relaxing weekend. The first night was fine. We had a nice dinner, soaked in the hot tub, went to bed early. But around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of someone crying. It was a woman's voice, coming from somewhere in the cabin. Soft, muffled sobs. I woke James and we both listened. The crying was definitely real, definitely inside the cabin with us. James grabbed a flashlight and we searched every room. The cabin was only 1 floor, just 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and an open living area. We checked everywhere. We were alone. But the crying continued. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, moving from room to room as we searched. After about 20 minutes, it stopped. James thought maybe it was pipes or the wind creating weird sounds. I wanted to believe that, but it hadn't sounded like pipes. It had sounded like a person. We went back to bed, though I had trouble falling asleep. When I finally did drift off, I had terrible nightmares. I dreamed I was in the cabin, but it was different. Older, dirtier, and there was a woman in the bedroom with me, standing in the corner, crying. When I tried to speak to her, she looked up, and her face was covered in bruises. I woke up screaming. James tried to calm me down, said it was just a bad dream. But when I looked at the corner of the room where the woman had been standing in my dream, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were wet footprints on the floor, small bare feet, leading from the corner to our bed. James saw them too. We both stared at those footprints, trying to come up with some logical explanation. But they were fresh, the water still soaking into the hardwood, and they ended right at the side of the bed where I'd been sleeping. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. We weren't staying another night. But when morning came, we found the front door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked from the inside, it just wouldn't open. The deadbolt turned, the handle turned, but the door wouldn't budge. Same with the back door and all the windows. It was like they'd been sealed shut. James tried breaking a window with a chair, but the glass wouldn't break. Not crack, not shatter, nothing. He hit it as hard as he could, and the chair just bounced off. We were trapped. We tried calling 911, but we had no cell service. The cabin was supposed to have a landline, but when we picked it up, all we heard was that crying again. The same woman's voice sobbing into the phone line. We spent that day trying to find a way out, but nothing worked. As it got dark, we heard footsteps walking around the cabin. Slow, deliberate steps, and that crying, constant now, coming from every room at once. That night, we both had the same dream. We were watching a scene play out like a movie. A young woman, maybe 25, living in the cabin with her husband. But he wasn't a good man. He hurt her, hit her, locked her in the bedroom. In our dream, we watched him beat her to death, then bury her body in the woods behind the cabin. When we woke up Sunday morning, the doors opened. Just like that. We threw our stuff in the car and got out of there as fast as we could. When we got home, I called the owner of the cabin. I told her we'd had to leave early due to an emergency and asked if she'd give us a partial refund. She was very apologetic and said, of course. Then I asked her about the cabin's history, if anything bad had ever happened there. There was a long silence. Then she asked how I knew. She told me that the cabin had been built in the 1970s by a couple. In 1983, the wife disappeared. The husband claimed she'd run off with another man, but her body was found 2 years later in the woods behind the cabin. The husband was arrested, tried, and convicted. He died in prison in 1999. The owner said she'd bought the cabin in 2019 and completely renovated it, thinking that would take care of any issues. She'd had a few guests complain about strange noises, but nothing like what we experienced. She offered us a full refund and begged us not to leave a bad review. I took the refund, but I didn't leave a review. What would I say? That the ghost of a murdered woman trapped us in a cabin for 2 days? No one would believe me. But I know it was real. We both do. And sometimes I still have that dream watching that poor woman's final moments. Only now at the end of the dream, she looks at me, right at me, and she mouths 2 words. Help me. I don't know how to help her. I don't know if she's still trapped in that cabin or if she somehow followed me home. All I know is that I'll never rent another mountain cabin, and I'll never stop feeling guilty that I left her there. Story 8. My name is Stephen Baker, and I'm a paramedic from Morgantown, West Virginia. In the summer of 2019, my girlfriend Rachel and I went on a backpacking trip in the Dolly Sods Wilderness area. We'd planned to spend 4 days hiking a loop trail, camping at different spots each night. The first 2 days went great. Beautiful weather, stunning views, no problems. On the third day, we were hiking through a particularly remote section when we came across something strange. There was a backpack sitting in the middle of the trail. It was a nice pack, expensive looking, and it appeared to be fully loaded. Rachel and I stopped and looked around, calling out to see if anyone was nearby. No response. We checked the pack, thinking maybe there was an AD or something that would tell us who it belonged to. Inside, we found clothes, food, a sleeping bag, all the typical backpacking gear. We also found a wallet with a driver's license. The license belonged to a woman named Amanda Richardson, aged 28, from Ohio. There was also a phone in one of the pockets, but it was dead. Rachel suggested we take the pack with us and turn it into a ranger station when we got back to civilization. I agreed. We strapped it to my pack and continued hiking. About an hour later, we found another backpack. This one also appeared to be fully loaded, sitting right in the middle of the trail. Just like the first one, same situation, no one around, and when we checked it, we found it belonged to a man named Christopher Hayes, age 32, also from Ohio. We started to get worried. 2 abandoned packs was strange, really strange. We picked up the pace, thinking maybe the owners were ahead of us, having some kind of emergency. That's when we found the tent. It was set up off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the woods. The flap was open and we could see sleeping bags inside. We called out again. No answer. Rachel stayed on the trail while I approached the tent carefully. The sleeping bags were laid out like someone had been using them, and there were 2 more backpacks inside, along with various personal items. But no people. It looked like they'd just gotten up and walked away, leaving everything behind. I was starting to seriously freak out at this point. 4 people, all their gear, just gone. Rachel suggested we call for help, but we had no cell service out there. The nearest ranger station was at least a full day's hike away. We made the decision to stay at the campsite and wait, thinking maybe the missing hikers had just gone off trail for some reason and would be back soon. While we waited, I went through the backpacks more thoroughly, trying to find anything that might explain what happened. That's when I found the notebook. It belonged to Amanda Richardson, and the last entry was dated 2 days before we found her pack. She'd written about how beautiful the area was, how she and her 3 friends were having an amazing time. Normal hiking journal stuff. But the last line made my skin crawl. We heard singing coming from the rocks, going to investigate. Rachel and I looked at each other. Singing from the rocks? What did that mean? We decided we weren't staying there after all. We'd hike back the way we'd come, get to the ranger station as fast as possible, and report what we'd found. As we were packing up to leave, We heard it singing. It was coming from a rock formation about 100 yards away, these huge boulders that jutted up from the forest floor. The voice was female, high and sweet, and she was singing something that sounded like a lullaby. Rachel grabbed my arm and said we needed to leave it now. I agreed. We started hiking back down the trail as fast as we could without running. The singing followed us. For the next 3 hours, as we hiked, we could hear that voice singing behind us. Sometimes it was close, sometimes it was distant, but it never stopped. When we'd stop to rest, the singing would stop. The moment we started moving again, it would start back up. We hiked through the night, not daring to stop for more than a few minutes at a time. By dawn, we'd made it back to the trailhead and drove straight to the ranger station. The rangers took our reports seriously. A search and rescue team went out that same day. They found the campsite, the backpacks, all the gear, but they never found Amanda Richardson, Christopher Hayes, or their 2 friends. The case is still open. The official explanation is that the 4 hikers got lost and succumbed to the elements, though why they'd leave all their gear behind is anyone's guess. But I know what happened. They heard that singing and went to investigate, just like the journal entry said. And whatever was doing, the singing took them. Rachel and I broke up a few months after that trip. She couldn't deal with the nightmares, the constant fear. I understand. I have the nightmares too. Dreams where I'm walking toward those rocks, drawn by that beautiful singing. And I know if I get there, I'll never come back. I've thought about going back, about trying to find those people. But I know I won't, because whatever is out there in those rocks is still singing. And I'm terrified that if I hear it again, I won't be able to resist. Story 9. My name is Michelle Carter, and I'm a school teacher from Roanoke, Virginia. What happened to me on a covered bridge in the mountains of North Carolina still gives me nightmares, and this was back in the spring of 2018. I was driving home from visiting my sister in Asheville, taking some back roads because I like the scenic route and I wasn't in any hurry. It was late afternoon getting toward evening, and I was driving through some pretty remote areas. I came around a curve and saw this old covered bridge ahead. It looked like something out of a postcard, one of those historic wooden bridges that are rare nowadays. There was a small sign next to it indicating it was built in 1882. I love old architecture, so I decided to stop and take a few pictures. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked onto the bridge. It was probably 50 feet long. My footsteps echoed on the wooden planks as I walked. I was taking pictures with my phone when I noticed something carved into one of the wooden beams. It looked like names, dozens of them, carved into the wood. I moved closer to read them, and that's when I realized they all had dates next to them. Mary Elizabeth Walker, June 3rd, 1889. Thomas James Preston, September 17th, 1891. Sarah Louise Harrison, February 28th, 1894. They went on and on, all these names with dates from the late 1800s and early 1900s. At first I thought it was just people carving their names and the dates they'd visited, like a historical guest book. But then I noticed the dates were all death dates. Next to each name was a small inscription, drowned in the river below. Fell from the bridge. Took her own life here. I was reading through these morbid carvings when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. The bridge was empty. I was about to go back to my car when I heard a voice. You should add your name. It was a woman's voice, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I spun around looking for the source, but I was alone. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaking. Add your name, the voice said again. Everyone who crosses has to add their name. I started backing toward my car, my heart racing. That's when I saw her. Standing at the far end of the bridge, blocking my path back to my car, was a woman in an old-fashioned white dress. Her hair was long and wet, hanging down like she'd just come out of the water. Add your name, she said again, and this time her mouth moved with the words. I turned to run the other way, but there was another woman standing at that end of the bridge, also in white, also with wet hair. Then another appeared, and another, until there were at least a dozen women, all in white dresses, all dripping water onto the wooden planks. They started moving toward me, closing in from both sides. I looked over the edge of the bridge, down at the river below. It was maybe a 20-foot drop. The water looked dark and fast-moving. Add your name, they all said in unison. Join us in the water. I made a split-second decision. I climbed onto the railing of the bridge and jumped. The water was ice cold and the current was stronger than it looked. I went under immediately, got turned around, didn't know which way was up. My lungs were burning and I thought I was going to drown. Then I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me up. I broke the surface and gasped for air. The hands kept pulling, dragging me to the shore. When I finally collapsed on the riverbank, coughing up water, I looked up to thank whoever had saved me. There was no one there. I was alone on the riverbank, soaking wet and freezing, but alive. I looked back at the bridge, and I could see figures standing on it, looking down at me. The women in white. I stumbled through the woods until I found the road, about a quarter-mile downstream from the bridge. My car was still parked where I'd left it. I got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. When I got home, I researched that bridge. Turns out it has a dark history. At least 14 women died there between 1882 and 1920. Some drowned in the river, some jumped from the bridge, some were pushed. The bridge had been closed to vehicles in 1975 due to structural concerns, but it was still accessible to pedestrians. I found articles about other people who'd visited the bridge and had similar experiences. Some saw the women in white. Some heard voices telling them to jump. A few people did jump. Not all of them survived. I've never gone back to that bridge, and I never will. But sometimes late at night, I dream that I'm standing on it again, and the women are there. And they're telling me I didn't finish what I started, that I still need to add my name to the wall. In the dream, I always climb up onto that railing, and I always jump. But when I hit the water, I don't come back up. I just sink down into the darkness. And I can hear them singing, the same lullaby I heard that day on the bridge. And I know that one day, the dream will become reality. One day I'll find myself driving on that same back road, and I won't be able to resist the urge to stop at that bridge one more time. And when I do, I'll add my name to the wall, and then I'll join them in the water. Story 10. My name is Richard Coleman, and I'm a geology professor at East Tennessee State University. In April of 2022, I took a group of students on a field trip to study rock formations in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. What started as an educational excursion turned into something I still can't fully explain. We had a group of 8 students, myself, and a graduate teaching assistant named Kyle. The plan was to hike to a specific geological site about 4 miles from the nearest trailhead, take samples and measurements, and hike back. Standard field work that I'd done countless times before. We set out early in the morning, and the hike to the site was uneventful. We reached our destination around noon, and the students spread out to take their measurements and collect samples. I was supervising a couple of students when Kyle came over and told me he'd found something interesting about 100 yards off our planned route. He'd been exploring a little and found what looked like an old trail that wasn't on any of our maps. It was pretty overgrown, but definitely man-made, with cut logs forming steps in the steeper sections. As a geologist, I'm always interested in how people move through landscapes, so I told him we'd check it out once everyone finished their work. About an hour later, we'd wrapped up what we needed to do. I told the students we were going to take a quick detour to look at this old trail Kyle had found before heading back. We followed him to where the trail started, and I have to admit I was curious. It was clearly old, probably decades since it had seen regular use, but it was well constructed. Someone had put significant effort into building it. We followed the trail for about 15 minutes, and it just kept going deeper into the forest, winding around large boulders and following the contours of the land. I was about to turn us around when one of the students, a girl named Emma, called out that she'd found something. There was a clearing ahead, and in the middle of it was a stone cairn, maybe 6 feet tall. But this wasn't like the small trail markers you sometimes see. This was elaborate, built with precision, and the stones were covered in carvings. Symbols I didn't recognize, and what looked like writing in a language I couldn't identify. As a scientist, my first instinct was excitement. This could be a significant archaeological find, but something about it felt wrong. The clearing was too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just absolute silence. I started taking pictures of the carvings, and the students were examining the cairn from different angles. Kyle walked around to the far side and called out that there was an opening, like a small doorway, built into the base of the cairn. I told him not to go inside, that we needed to report this to the Park Service and let proper archaeologists examine it. But before I could stop him, He'd bent down and stepped through the opening. "Kyle, get back here," I called. He didn't respond. I walked around to where the opening was and called his name again. Still nothing. I could see into the opening, and it appeared to be a small chamber, maybe 4 feet deep, but Kyle wasn't inside. I called his name louder, starting to get worried. The students gathered around, and we all looked into the chamber. It was empty. No other exits, no way Kyle could have gotten out. But he was gone. Emma suggested maybe he'd come out a different way and was playing a prank on us. We spread out, searching the clearing and calling his name. Nothing. He'd simply vanished. I made the decision to get the students out of there and call for help. We hiked back to the trailhead as quickly as possible, and I immediately reported Kyle's disappearance to park rangers. A massive search operation was launched. Search and rescue teams, helicopters, dogs, the works. I led them back to the clearing with the cairn, but when we got there, the clearing was empty. The cairn was gone. Not destroyed, not knocked over, just gone. Like it had never existed. The rangers thought I was either lying or had gotten confused about the location, but I had GPS coordinates. I knew exactly where we'd been. We searched the entire area, no cairn, no stone chamber, no Kyle. The official conclusion was that Kyle had gotten separated from the group and gotten lost. Despite extensive searching, he was never found. The case is still open, but there are no leads. But I know what happened. Kyle stepped into that chamber and went somewhere else. Somewhere we can't follow. I had the photos I'd taken of the cairn and the carvings on my phone. I showed them to colleagues, to experts in ancient languages and symbols. No one could identify them. One professor I showed them to, a specialist in Native American history, went pale when he saw them. He told me to delete the photos and never speak of what I'd found. When I asked why, he said that some things are hidden for a reason, and the people who built that cairn knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't delete the photos right away, but a week later, they were gone from my phone, not deleted by me, just gone. The backups I'd made to my computer were also gone. It was like they'd been erased from existence. I still lead field trips, but never to that area, and I make sure to stick strictly to marked trails. Some paths are meant to be forgotten, and some doorways are meant to stay closed. Kyle's family never got closure. I never got answers. All I have are memories of that silent clearing, that impossible cairn, and the knowledge that my teaching assistant stepped through a doorway and never came back. Sometimes I dream about going back, about finding that trail again, about stepping through that opening to see where Kyle went. But I know if I do that, I won't come back either. And maybe that's what it wants. Maybe that's what it's always wanted. Just one more person to step through. Just one more person to disappear into whatever lies on the other side. Hey everyone, thank you so much for sticking with me through all 10 of these absolutely terrifying stories. From Appalachia. These are real accounts from real people who experienced things in those mountains that they'll never forget. If these stories gave you chills, if they made you think twice about your next camping trip, then please do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. We are so incredibly close to 1,000 subscribers, and we need to hit that milestone before my birthday next month. Every single subscription matters. Every like helps. And please leave a comment telling me which of these 10 stories scared you the most. Was it the singing in Spruce Hollow? The fire tower with the names and dates? The children's voices at the old homestead? Your engagement helps this channel grow and allows me to bring you more true horror stories from the most mysterious and terrifying places in America. Share this video with your friends who love scary stories. Tell them about Park Ranger Files. Help us build this community of people who understand that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened. Thank you again for watching.